Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Imagine moving into your late aunt's home, finally breathing. Then a crew pulls into your driveway to fix your lawn without your permission. They swear the HOA ordered it, except there's one problem. As far as I know, the HOA has zero power over my property. So who's lying here? My great-aunt Martha passed away last spring at the age of 89. She was one of those old-school independent women who never married, worked as a librarian for 40 years, and lived in the same house she bought in 1962. When the lawyer read her will, I was shocked to learn she'd left me everything, including her beautiful Victorian-style home. The house sits on just over an acre of land in what used to be farmland about 30 minutes outside the city. It's got character, wrap-around porch, original hardwood floors, and these gorgeous bay windows that catch the morning light perfectly. Sure, it needed some work. The paint was peeling a bit, and Aunt Martha had let the garden grow wild in her later years. But it was mine, free and clear. What I didn't realize at the time was that sometime in the early 2000s, developers had built a massive subdivision all around Aunt Martha's property. They called it Golden Oaks, and it was one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every house looks exactly the same. Beige siding, black shutters, perfectly manicured lawns. The kind of place where measuring grass height with a ruler isn't considered crazy. Aunt Martha's house sat right in the middle of all this suburban uniformity like a colorful wildflower in a field of wheat. I later learned that the developers had tried repeatedly to buy her out over the years. She'd turned them down every single time, politely but firmly. The woman had backbone. I'm a data analyst by trade, which means I have a natural tendency to dig into details and verify information before making decisions. It served me well professionally, and as it turned out, it was about to serve me even better personally. The first week after moving in was peaceful. I spent my days unpacking boxes and getting familiar with the house. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, waving when they walked by with their dogs. A few even stopped to introduce themselves and share fond memories of Aunt Martha. Then the mail arrived. I was expecting the usual stuff. Utility bills to transfer into my name, change of address confirmations, maybe some catalogs. Instead, I found a thick manila envelope with no return address. Inside was what looked like an official document titled New Homeowner Compliance Package, along with several pages of printed materials. The first page was an invoice. Not a bill, not a request. An invoice. For $2,500 in something called property transfer fees and administrative costs. It was made out to me personally and marked as due within 30 days of property transfer. The second page was worse. It was a list of 14 different violations that needed to be corrected immediately. Apparently, my front door was the wrong color. It was painted a cheerful yellow that Aunt Martha had chosen. My grass was too tall. It was maybe 3 inches high. There were non-approved plantings in the flower beds, Aunt Martha's prize-winning roses. The list went on and on. I sat at the kitchen table staring at these papers, completely baffled. I'd never signed up for any homeowner association. I'd never agreed to any rules or fees. As far as I knew, I owned this property outright with no strings attached. That's when I noticed the letterhead at the top of the documents. Golden Oaks Homeowners Association, preserving property values through community standards. I spent the next few hours researching online. Golden Oaks definitely had an HOA. A particularly strict one from what I could find on neighborhood forums. People complained about the micromanagement, the high fees, and the board members who seemed to take their authority way too seriously. But nowhere could I find any indication that my property was part of their jurisdiction. 3 days later, I got my answer in person. I was in the backyard pulling weeds when I heard the doorbell ring. Through the front window, I could see a man in a dark suit standing on my porch. He was probably in his 50s with perfectly styled gray hair and the kind of expensive watch that catches sunlight. His suit looked like it cost more than my car, though something about the way it hung on his shoulders suggested it didn't fit quite right. I opened the door and he immediately extended his hand with a smile that seemed practiced rather than genuine. Good afternoon. I'm the legal counsel for Golden Oaks Homeowners Association. I believe you received our compliance materials earlier this week. I shook his hand briefly. I did receive some papers, yes, though I'm not sure why. His smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. Well, that's actually why I'm here. There seems to be some confusion about your property's status. May I come in for a few minutes to clear this up? It wasn't really a question. He was already stepping forward as if my agreement was assumed. I didn't move from the doorway. I'm not confused about anything. This is my house, on my property, that I inherited free and clear. I never agreed to join any homeowner association. He chuckled in that condescending way some people use when they think they're dealing with someone who doesn't understand how the world works. I appreciate your position, but there's been a significant misunderstanding. When your great-aunt's property was incorporated into the Golden Oaks Master Development Plan, certain legal obligations were automatically transferred. The property is now subject to the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I felt my jaw tighten. Incorporated by whom? When? I'd like to see the documentation. Of course, that's all standard procedure. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. What we need to do today is formalize your membership with a joinder agreement. It's really just a formality. The legal obligation already exists, but having your signature makes everything cleaner for our records. He held out a multi-page document. I could see signature lines highlighted in yellow throughout the pages. And if I don't sign this? His practiced smile finally slipped a bit. Well, I'd strongly advise against that course of action. The association has the legal authority to enforce its covenants through fines and, if necessary, property liens. We prefer not to take such steps, but we will protect the community's interests. I looked at the papers in his hands, but didn't take them. I don't make decisions based on verbal claims. If my property has some existing legal obligation to your association, I'd like to see the specific recorded documents that created that obligation, the actual deed restrictions, or the covenant that was signed by the property owner and filed with the county. For just a moment, his confident demeanor cracked. He blinked twice and cleared his throat. Those are administrative details. What matters is resolving this situation quickly and amicably. I'm trying to save you from a much more unpleasant process. What kind of process? Legal action, formal enforcement proceedings, daily fines accumulating while the matter works through the courts. It could get very expensive very quickly. He said this while looking directly at me, like he was trying to gauge whether his threats were having the desired effect. When I just stared back without responding, he continued, Look, I understand this seems overwhelming, but the reality is that your property falls within the boundaries of Golden Oaks. The master plan was approved by the city and filed with the county. The covenants run with the land. Your great-aunt may not have been actively participating in the association, but that doesn't change the legal obligations. I crossed my arms. Then it should be easy for you to show me those filed documents. Another pause. Longer this time. I don't carry the entire legal archive in my briefcase. What I can tell you is that if you don't sign the joinder agreement by Friday, the association will have no choice but to begin formal enforcement proceedings. I'm trying to help you avoid that. And if I want to review the actual legal basis for your claims before signing anything? He sighed like I was being unreasonably difficult. That's your right, of course, but I'd strongly encourage you not to drag this out. The board has been very patient about this situation, but that patience has limits. He placed his business card on the porch railing and tucked the joinder agreement back into his briefcase. My contact information is there. I'll need an answer by Friday afternoon. I hope you'll make the wise choice. With that, he turned and walked back to his expensive sedan parked in my driveway. I watched him drive away, then picked up his business card. It was heavy stock paper with embossed lettering, the kind of thing designed to impress people. The name read Sterling Legal Services with a downtown address. I went back inside and sat at my kitchen table with a notepad. Something about this whole interaction felt off. If my property really was legally bound to join their HOA, why all the pressure tactics? Why not just mail me the documentation I'd requested along with the compliance materials? I started making notes about everything I could remember from our conversation, the way he'd avoided directly answering my questions, the vague references to master plans and administrative details without any specific citations, the artificial deadline, the threats disguised as helpful advice. It felt like a sales pitch dressed up as legal necessity. That evening, I called my cousin who works as a paralegal. I described the situation and read her the exact wording from the invoice and violation list. That's weird, she said. If you're already bound by existing covenants, why would they need you to sign a joinder agreement? Those are usually used to bring in properties that weren't originally part of the development. That's what I was thinking too. Did they give you any recorded document numbers, reference to specific filings with the county? No, just vague claims about master plans and automatic obligations. She was quiet for a moment. You might want to do some research at the county recorder's office. If there are legitimate deed restrictions on your property, they'll be in the public records, and if there aren't, then they're trying to trick me into creating obligations that don't currently exist. Exactly. The next morning, I decided to test their enforcement capabilities. If my property really was subject to their rules, surely they'd have some way of monitoring compliance beyond just threatening letters. I left my grass exactly as it was, 3 inches high and apparently criminal by their standards. I left my yellow front door yellow. I even added a small wind chime to my porch, figuring that probably violated some noise ordinance in their rule book. Then I waited. 2 days later, I was working at my computer when I heard the sound of a truck in my driveway. I looked out the window to see a landscaping crew unloading equipment. A man in a company shirt was walking toward my front door. I met him on the porch. "Can I help you?" "We're here to bring your lawn up to community standards. Shouldn't take more than an hour or so." "Who hired you to do this?" He looked confused. "The homeowner association. We have a work order." I kept my voice friendly but firm. "I didn't hire you, and I don't want any work done on my property. You need to leave now." "But we have a work order," he repeated, pulling out a clipboard. "It says the property is in violation and needs immediate remediation. I understand you think you have authorization, but you don't. This is private property, and I'm telling you to leave. If you don't, I'll have to call the police for trespassing." The crew supervisor looked genuinely confused, like this had never happened before. After a moment, he shrugged and started waving his guys back to the truck. "Your call, lady. We'll let the office know you refused service." I watched them pack up and drive away, then immediately called Sterling Legal Services. The receptionist put me through to him directly. "I just had to turn away a landscaping crew that claimed they were hired by your client to work on my property without my permission." "Ah, yes. The association was trying to help you get into compliance quickly. Obviously, if you prefer to handle the violations yourself, that's your choice. But the deadline still stands." "What deadline? You said I had until Friday to sign your joinder agreement. You never said anything about contractors showing up uninvited. The joinder agreement is separate from the existing violations. Those need to be corrected regardless." I felt my temper starting to rise, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Let me be very clear. I did not give anyone permission to enter my property or perform any work. If anyone else shows up here without my explicit consent, I will call the police and file trespassing charges." "I think you're misunderstanding the situation." "No, I think I understand perfectly. You're trying to pressure me into signing an agreement by creating problems you claim to be solving. It's not going to work." I hung up before he could respond. That afternoon, I drove to the county recorder's office. It was one of those government buildings that looks like it was designed in the 1970s by someone who didn't believe in windows or color. The records clerk was a patient woman in her 60s who seemed genuinely interested in helping me figure out what I was looking for. "I need to research the title history and any recorded covenants on my property," I told her, providing the address and parcel number. She led me to a computer terminal and showed me how to search the database. Property records going back to the 1940s are all digitized. If you need anything older than that, we'll have to pull the physical files. I started with the most recent entries and worked backwards. I found the deed transferring the property to me from Aunt Martha's estate. Before that, the deed showing Aunt Martha's original purchase in 1962. Various refinancing documents over the years, but nothing that looked like HOA covenants or deed restrictions. I kept going back further, looking for anything that might have created an obligation to join a homeowner association. Nothing. Then I found something interesting. In 1988, there was a letter filed with the recorder's office. It was on city letterhead and addressed to Golden Oaks Development Corporation. The subject line read, "Petition for Mandatory HOA Inclusion, Parcel 847-3829-001. I recognized that parcel number as mine. The letter was signed by someone from the city planning department and stamped with an official seal. The key paragraph read, "After review of the petition submitted by Golden Oaks Development Corporation requesting mandatory inclusion of the above-referenced parcel in the proposed homeowner association, the city finds that said petition lacks the required consent of the property owner. Property owner Martha, last name, has submitted written objection to inclusion. Request denied." My hands were actually shaking as I read this. Aunt Martha had fought this battle 25 years ago and won. The city had officially rejected the developer's attempt to force her property into their HOA. I printed copies of everything I'd found, including that 1988 letter. Then I asked the clerk to help me pull the official plat map showing the legal boundaries of the Golden Oaks subdivision. The map was crystal clear. The Golden Oaks development was drawn as a large rectangle with my property sitting in the middle like a hole in a donut. My parcel was specifically excluded from the subdivision boundaries. I drove home with a folder full of ammunition, but I wasn't ready to fire all my shots yet. First, I wanted to see exactly what Sterling would do when his Friday deadline arrived. Friday came and went with no signature from me. The following Monday, I received a certified letter from Sterling Legal Services. It was 3 pages of dense legal language, but the basic message was clear. They were preparing to sue me for violating HOA covenants and failing to comply with association rules. The letter cited specific statutes about homeowner associations and made references to recorded restrictions and established covenants. It demanded immediate payment of the $2,500 in fees plus additional fines that had supposedly accrued since the original notice. It was an impressive piece of legal intimidation, clearly designed to scare someone into compliance. But now I knew it was built on a foundation of lies. I spent the next few days crafting my response. Not to Sterling, but to the HOA board directly. I wanted to give them one chance to back down gracefully before I brought out the heavy artillery. I wrote a polite but firm letter explaining that I had researched the matter thoroughly and found no evidence that my property was subject to their covenants. I requested that they provide specific recorded document numbers for any deed restrictions or obligations they claimed applied to my property. I gave them 2 weeks to respond. I sent copies to Sterling and to the board president, whose name and address I'd found on the HOA's website. Her name was Brenda, and her profile photo showed exactly the kind of haircut you'd expect from someone who considers HOA enforcement a personal calling. Brenda's response arrived within 3 days. It wasn't what I expected. Instead of legal arguments or document references, I got a phone call. She was practically yelling before I'd even finished saying hello. "Who do you think you are sending threatening letters to board members? We're volunteers trying to protect property values in this community, and you're acting like we're criminals or something." I stayed calm. I didn't threaten anyone, I simply requested documentation to support your legal claims. "Our legal claims? We have a lawyer handling this situation and he's already explained everything to you. Your property is part of this community whether you like it or not. If that's true, it should be easy to prove with recorded documents." "I don't have to prove anything to you. This community was here long before you moved in, and it'll be here long after you're gone. Either you follow the rules like everyone else, or you deal with the consequences." "What consequences specifically?" "Liens, fines, legal action. Whatever it takes to protect the rights of homeowners who actually care about their community." I took a deep breath. "Brenda, I'm trying to handle this reasonably. But if your association continues to claim authority it doesn't have, or if anyone else shows up on my property without permission, I'll have no choice but to take legal action to protect my rights. You can't intimidate us with legal threats, we have a lawyer too." She hung up on me. That call convinced me that reasonable discussion wasn't going to work. These people were either genuinely confused about their authority, or they were deliberately trying to bully me into submission. Either way, it was time to end this nonsense. I called a real estate attorney whose name I'd found online. Her office was about 20 minutes from my house, and she specialized in property disputes and HOA issues. When I described the situation over the phone, she asked me to come in that afternoon. The attorney was a sharp woman in her 40s who listened carefully as I laid out the timeline and showed her the documents I'd collected. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. "This is either the most incompetent legal counsel I've encountered, or they're deliberately misrepresenting the law to pressure you into compliance. Which do you think it is?" "Based on what you've told me, probably both. Sterling may not have done thorough research, and now he's in too deep to admit he was wrong. The HOA board clearly wants your property under their control, and they're not too concerned about the legal niceties." She examined the 1988 letter from the city planning department. "This is gold. It's an official government determination that your property cannot be forced into their association. Combined with the plat map showing your parcel as excluded from the subdivision boundaries, you have an ironclad case." "So what's my next step?" We file a quiet title action to officially establish that your property is not subject to any HOA covenants. We also send a cease and desist letter demanding they stop harassing you, and if they've caused you any damages through their actions, we can pursue compensation for those as well. The legal fees would be significant, but I was tired of being pushed around by people who thought they could intimidate me with fake authority. Let's do it. One more thing, she said as I was gathering my documents. I'd like to set up a meeting with Sterling and the board, give them one last chance to walk away before we file suit. Sometimes when people realize they're about to face real legal consequences, they become much more reasonable. I like that idea. What kind of meeting? We invite them to your house, let them make their case one more time. When they can't produce the documentation they claim exists, we show them what we've found. It gives them an opportunity to retreat gracefully, and if they refuse, we have witnesses to their continued misrepresentation. 2 days later, I sent invitations to Sterling and Brenda asking them to attend a resolution meeting at my house the following Saturday afternoon. I kept the language neutral and professional, suggesting that we could clear up any misunderstandings and reach an amicable solution. Sterling called me that evening. I think a meeting is an excellent idea. This situation has gotten more confrontational than it needs to be. I'm confident we can work something out. Brenda was harder to convince, but she eventually agreed to attend to make sure the community's interests are protected. Saturday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, which seemed appropriate for the confrontation I was expecting. I'd spent the morning organizing my documents and reviewing my strategy with the attorney. She would attend as my legal counsel, which should signal to Sterling that this wasn't just a friendly chat anymore. I also set up a small digital recorder on the coffee table. Everyone would know the conversation was being recorded, which tends to keep people more honest. Sterling arrived first, driving the same expensive sedan I'd seen before. This time he brought a briefcase and what looked like a poster tube. Brenda showed up 5 minutes later in a white SUV with multiple HOA-related bumper stickers. My attorney was already waiting in the living room when I showed them in. I made introductions and offered coffee, which everyone declined. The atmosphere was polite but tense. I appreciate everyone taking the time for this meeting, I began. I'm hoping we can resolve this situation without further escalation. Sterling opened his briefcase and pulled out several folders. Absolutely. I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the legal status of this property, and I'd like to clear that up today. He unrolled what turned out to be a large map showing the Golden Oaks subdivision. My property was clearly visible in the center, surrounded by the development. As you can see, your property sits entirely within the boundaries of Golden Oaks. When the master plan was approved by the city, all properties within these boundaries became subject to the community's covenants. My attorney leaned forward. Can you show us the recorded document that created that obligation? Of course. Sterling pulled out a thick folder. Here are the original CC&Rs filed with the county when the development was approved. He handed over a document that was probably 50 pages long. My attorney and I scanned through it quickly. It was definitely the official covenants for Golden Oaks, complete with filing stamps and signatures, but there was a problem. This document defines the Golden Oaks subdivision as including only the lots specifically platted and designated as part of the development, my attorney said. According to the legal description here, that would exclude any existing properties that weren't part of the original subdivision plan. Sterling looked confused, but the property is clearly within the geographic boundaries of the community. Geographic proximity doesn't create legal obligations, my attorney replied. For property to be bound by these covenants, it has to be specifically included in the legal description of the development, or the property owner has to voluntarily agree to be bound. I could see Brenda getting agitated. This is ridiculous legal wordplay. The property is surrounded by our community. It benefits from our maintenance of common areas and our efforts to preserve property values. It should contribute to the costs and follow the same rules as everyone else. I understand your position, I said, but wanting something to be true doesn't make it legally binding. Sterling was flipping through his folder, clearly looking for something that would support his claims. There was a master annexation plan that included all properties within the development boundaries. Where's that plan? My attorney asked. Is it recorded with the county? Signed by the property owners? Another long pause. The details were handled administratively during the development approval process. I could feel the momentum shifting. It was time to play my ace. I'd like to show you something, I said, pulling out my own folder. I handed Sterling a copy of the 1988 letter from the city planning department. His face went pale as he read it. Brenda tried to look over his shoulder, but he angled the paper away from her. "What is that?" she demanded. "It's an official letter from the city rejecting Golden Oaks Development Corporation's petition to force my property into their HOA. The property owner at the time objected to inclusion, and the city sided with the property owner." Sterling was staring at the letter like it was written in a foreign language. This document is 25 years old. The legal landscape has changed significantly since then. "Has it?" my attorney asked. "Has there been any subsequent legal action that would override this determination? Any court orders or recorded agreements that would change the property's status?" Sterling didn't answer immediately. I could practically see the wheels turning as he tried to figure out his next move. Brenda apparently decided that direct confrontation was the answer. "I don't care what some old letter says. This property is in the middle of our community. If you don't want to follow reasonable rules about property maintenance and aesthetics, maybe you should move somewhere else." My attorney smiled in a way that made me glad she was on my side. "Are you suggesting that my client should be forced to sell her property because she won't voluntarily join an organization she has no legal obligation to join?" "I'm suggesting that good neighbors don't hide behind legal technicalities when asked to contribute to their community. And I'm suggesting that HOA boards don't have the authority to unilaterally expand their jurisdiction to include properties that were never part of their development." The room went very quiet. Sterling was still studying the 1988 letter like he hoped the words would change if he stared at them long enough. Finally, I decided to end this charade. "Here's what I think happened," I said. "Your association has wanted my property for years, maybe for expansion space, maybe just because you don't like having a non-conforming property in your midst. When I inherited the house, you saw an opportunity to pressure a newcomer who might not know better." I pulled out the plat map showing my property excluded from the subdivision boundaries. "But you overplayed your hand. Instead of making a reasonable offer to purchase the property, or asking nicely if I'd consider voluntary membership, you tried to intimidate me with fake legal obligations and threats of lawsuits." Sterling finally looked up from the letter. "I think there may have been some miscommunication about the exact legal status of—" "No," I interrupted. "This wasn't miscommunication. You sent me an invoice for fees I don't owe, a list of violations for rules that don't apply to me, and threats of legal action based on authority you don't have. That's fraud." The word fraud had an immediate effect. Sterling's face went from pale to gray. My attorney opened her own folder. "We've prepared a cease and desist letter demanding that Golden Oaks HOA stop claiming authority over my client's property. We're also prepared to file a quiet title action to officially establish that the property is not subject to any HOA covenants." She handed Sterling a copy of the letter. "Additionally, my client has suffered damages as a result of your actions. She's had to take time off work to deal with this harassment, hire legal counsel, and research property records that should have been checked before any claims were made." Sterling was scanning the cease and desist letter with the expression of someone who just realized he was in quicksand. "Furthermore," my attorney continued, "sending demand letters claiming legal authority that doesn't exist and threatening litigation based on false premises raises serious questions about professional conduct." That was when Sterling's composure finally cracked completely. Wait, hold on," he said, holding up his hands. "I think we've all gotten a bit off track here. Obviously, if there's been any confusion about the property's status, that needs to be corrected immediately." He turned to Brenda. "I think we need to reassess this situation completely. I may have made some assumptions about the legal framework that weren't fully supported." Brenda looked like she was about to explode. "What are you talking about? You told us this property had to join the association. You said it was a legal requirement." Sterling actually put his hand on her arm like he was trying to physically restrain her from saying anything else. "Brenda, I think we should discuss this privately before making any further statements." But Brenda wasn't done. "Are you telling me we've been wasting months on this because you didn't do your homework? Brenda, please." "And now she's threatening to sue us? Because you told us we had the right to enforce our rules on her property." It was like watching a lawyer's worst nightmare unfold in real time. His client was publicly undermining his case while he desperately tried to minimize the damage. My attorney was taking notes throughout this exchange, probably for the malpractice suit that Sterling would be facing if this continued much longer. "I think this meeting has been very productive," I said, standing up. You now have clear documentation showing that my property is not part of your association and never has been. You have a cease and desist letter explaining the legal consequences if this harassment continues, and you have an opportunity to end this matter without further legal action. Sterling was already packing his briefcase. Yes, absolutely. I think we all need to step back and reassess. Obviously, we want to resolve this amicably. Brenda was still sputtering about property values and community standards, but Sterling was practically dragging her toward the door. "We'll be in touch," he said, though he looked like the last thing he wanted was any further contact with me or my attorney. I watched them leave from my front porch, then came back inside to debrief with my attorney. "That went better than I expected," she said. "Sterling knows he's in serious trouble. He'll recommend that the board drop this matter immediately. And if they don't, then we file suit and probably win damages and attorney fees, but I don't think it'll come to that. He's too worried about his professional reputation to let this drag on." She was right. 3 days later, I received a formal letter from Sterling acknowledging that further research had revealed ambiguities in the legal status of my property. The letter stated that Golden Oaks HOA would no longer claim authority over my property or attempt to enforce any rules or collect any fees. The letter also included a check for $5,000 as compensation for any inconvenience caused by the confusion. I called my attorney to make sure the settlement was legitimate and comprehensive. She reviewed the letter and confirmed that it effectively ended their claims against my property. "The payment is probably their way of avoiding a lawsuit," she explained. "They're hoping that a reasonable settlement offer will convince you not to pursue damages for harassment and legal fees." I thought about it for a few days. I could probably win a larger settlement if we went to court, but I'd already accomplished my main goal, establishing my property rights and ending their harassment. I decided to accept the settlement and move on with my life, but first, I had one more bit of business to take care of. I used part of the settlement money to hire a painter. After consulting several color charts and HOA documents that no longer applied to me, I chose a shade called electric lavender for my front door. It was bold, beautiful, and specifically prohibited in the Golden Oaks covenants. I also used some of the money to install a flagpole in my front yard. Not just any flagpole, but a 20-foot tall beauty that was visible from anywhere in the subdivision. I flew the American flag during the day and a cheerful rainbow flag in the evenings. The HOA covenants had strict rules about flagpoles, maximum height, approved locations, approved flags only, none of which applied to me anymore. 6 months later, I was sitting on my front porch with a glass of iced tea when I noticed Brenda walking by on the sidewalk. She stopped and stared at my electric lavender door and my magnificent flagpole for a long moment. Then she looked directly at me, sitting in my rocking chair on my non-compliant porch, and shook her head in obvious disgust before continuing her walk. I raised my glass in a friendly salute and smiled. Some battles are worth fighting, especially when you have the law on your side and opponents who mistake bullying for authority. My property remains a colorful island of independence in a sea of beige conformity, and I couldn't be happier with the arrangement. The best part is knowing that every time someone in the Golden Oaks development looks out their window and sees my house, they're reminded that HOA authority has limits, and sometimes, just sometimes, the little guy wins. The next one is an entitled people story. My husband and I host a tabletop game on a semi-regular basis. Until a few months ago, that included Joe and his girlfriend, Carrie. Before I go into what happened, let me give you a little background. My husband and I tried our best to be kind for Joe's sake, but Carrie is a difficult person. She thinks she is entitled to say and do whatever she wants, regardless of the consequences, without comment. At one point, my husband said it's important to consider how our actions affect others, and she responded, "That's your opinion." In the tabletop game we were playing, whenever we started strategizing, her character would get bored and wander off to get attention by doing plot-derailing things like breaking the law in front of the town guards. One way to ensure she brought something up all the time was to say no. She often brought up playing at their house, which was 30 minutes out of the way. She convinced Joe to go on a divorce show with her. No, they've never even been engaged. Then kept suggesting my husband and I could also get on TV and make a few $100. And she couldn't understand why we weren't interested. Worst of all, she often made tone-deaf jokes about topics multiple people in the room had trauma with, including reproductive health, assaulted, and dead dogs, the last one being its own special story. Now, Joe was never the most punctual person in the world, but Carrie magnified that. They asked us to move the game to a weekday evening, so Carrie could have the weekend for her occasional freelance work as a clown. Even with the move, they frequently canceled with little notice, often because Carrie had whoopsie planned something and forgot to put it on the calendar again. When they did show up, they could be over an hour late, always for very important reasons like she really wanted McDonald's instead of the pizza we'd already ordered. It became such an issue that we moved the start time later, so naturally they started arriving later. A couple weeks before my birthday, I texted the group saying I had made plans for the weekends before and after the actual day and invited the group to join either. Joe and Carrie were going to be out of town both weekends, but at their suggestion, the group planned a low-key game night on my birthday, which was a Tuesday. The Saturday before, Joe cancels. Why? He just remembered he had concert tickets that day. He was sorry. Carrie said, "It's not my fault, I don't even like rock concerts, let's move to Monday." As they knew, hubby and I had limited to no reception over the weekend, so even if I had wanted to coordinate rescheduling, it was too late. I wrote, "I'm celebrating my birthday on the day I was born with whoever wants to join." That Tuesday, another friend got sick, and we ended up canceling the night altogether. For this, and various more serious, unrelated reasons, that week was really rough. Hubby and I decided to cancel our next game night, saying I was still feeling raw about everything and wasn't up for hanging out just yet. Everyone else said they understood and take care. Carrie asked if they could still bring me a present. I said I appreciate it, but just needed space for the moment. She exploded. I got a lengthy text about how she doesn't like the way I've been speaking to her. They had gotten the tickets months ago, it was an honest mistake, and acting like we've done something wrong is not okay. She said my texts were aggressive and made her feel scolded, that I should have sent her a personalized message if I had a problem, and that I have no right to have a problem anyway. At one point, I mentioned how deflating it can be to clean and prep a house only for people to cancel, so she suggested they help by hosting the game at their house. Oh, and by the way, they'd like to come by really soon with the present. The present got brought up a lot. Later in the conversation, they accidentally copy/pasted the full dialogue with ChatGPT they'd been using to write to us. She defended this by saying she was just using it to make the conversation less emotional. We could see she had written things like, "Add in that I won't monitor her feelings." I really did try to smooth things over, but ultimately, she decided to walk away from the game. She told Joe she was going to show grace by stepping aside so that he could maintain a friendship with us. All she asked was he make it clear that he agrees we're being unfair, she's done nothing wrong, the problem was my trauma, and he was not going to tolerate our calling her rude or insensitive. Well, graceful as that was of her, our friendship with Joe has also ended. Anyway, thank you for watching.